Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I am delighted to say I'm here with Mike Ettore. He is the author of Trust-Based Leadership, an ex-US Marine infantry officer, and the founder of Fidelis Leadership Group. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Richard. I am privileged to be here. I was delighted when your assistant reached out to me. So yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we came on, you filled in the blanks a little bit about that intro. Yeah, just a, sort of the time you spent in the military and, you know, before you came to writing this book.
Sure. I was, I'm an old guy now, so I'm 64, but I say 64 is the new 4. So I'm young at heart. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1974, served 4 years as an enlisted man. Got out in 1978, went to college for 4 years with the intention of earning a college degree so I could go back in the Marine Corps as a commissioned officer. Did that, stayed until retirement in 1998, and was fortunate to land with a really great company, a professional services, a staffing company, IT staffing, IT and finance and accounting staffing called Kforce. And I joined them in 1999, and the bad news was the dot-com crash hit. The good news was there was so much chaos in the company that there was opportunity everywhere. So I was able to be rapidly promoted. They were throwing me all sorts of responsibilities. So fast forward 5 years, Richard, I was now a C-level executive in charge of most of the company's non-sales functions. The IT department, marketing, human resources, purchasing. We had part of finance. We had a pretty robust presence in Manila in the Philippines. So if it wasn't involved in selling, it pretty much fell under my purview. And I finished up my last 10 years at Kforce in that role, in that senior, C-level executive role. Retired in 2013. I can't say enough good about the folks I worked with at Kforce. I mean, what a great team, what a great education. My theme is trust-based leadership, and they just trusted me right off the bat. I mean, they knew I had been a Marine, so they knew, okay, here's a good guy, great patriot and all that. But the level of trust and authority that they gave me right off the bat, it was just, no pun intended, textbook.
But was that because they saw something in you, in your countenance and demeanor, or was that pervasive through the culture?
That's a great question. I was really the first, in a way, military person to get into the company. And so I think rightfully so, they looked at me and said, well, we know he's a good man and all of that. But it was, I think very quickly they realized this guy doesn't really know much about our business, but he can organize things. He can conduct meetings. He can plan really well. And after about 6 months, my boss, who then was the COO, he said, Mike, I knew all of what I just said, Richard. I knew you'd be a good man. I'm a fan of the Marines and all of that. You want to know the number one thing that surprises me the most about you that I wasn't expecting? I'm like, okay, what is that, Larry? And he said, the fact that you can write. He said, your writing skills and ability to put an email out to a few thousand people and walk them through it very succinctly, like, okay, here's the situation, here's what we need to do, here's what we need to do when it needs to be done by, here's what I'm going to give you, here's what I need. He said, your ability to do that is really excellent. And I'm like, well, okay, well, thank you, I'll take that. And I said, well, to be honest with you, I learned all of that in the Marine Corps. I don't consider myself exceptional from a Marine Corps standard. I think what you're telling me is that this skill, these qualities are not all that common in this company. And he said, yes, and I've experienced enough to know that they're not all that common in most companies. So I think once people saw that I was a quick learner and that I could really organize and harness effort toward a unified goal, people started deferring to me from a planning standpoint, and they saw the light, so to speak. I like to think that for a while there, I was learning far more from them than they were from me. But to their credit, I mean, I worked with very open-minded business leaders who, after being in business 10, 20, 30 years or more, accomplished people said, okay, this guy's good. Despite his lack of business experience, this guy has some skills that, quite honestly, exceed ours. So it was the perfect scenario for an executive team. There were strengths that I brought, and there were other people on that executive team that had forgotten more about certain business skills than I would ever know or ever need to know. And so it really was, they didn't insist that I become an accountant, so to speak, or a finance guy or a marketing guy. They wanted me to be an executive in the purest sense, a generalist that could really put his arms around various functions and departments and get them to peacefully coexist and align all efforts toward the company's goals and objectives. And I like to say that I've done that, but I have to stay humble and say I got a lot of the praise and recognition, but I had some incredible people working with me and in my organization. So after some initial rough guidance to them, I mean, I really had, after a few years, Richard, I just had to step out of their way. They were so good.
Right.
And so at some point I found that the main value I could add in the meeting was, hey, I brought coffee, fellas, I mean, I'm just here to watch, but I brought you coffee, And
Right.
so it was a joy to watch as a leader. I mean, one of my biggest things is to develop leaders and all of that. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer. 15 years with Kforce, took a year off, thought I was done. And then I realized during that year, Richard, the 2013 to 14, I probably went to lunch, had coffee, dinner with 30 or 40 people who were seeking my advice. And I loved it. And I realized I was coaching. And
Right.
so that got me intrigued. And I'm like, Mike, you're a fifth gear kind of guy from an automotive perspective. You're kind of drifting around here in second gear, and it's not good for you. So I opened up my own leadership practice, Fidelis Leadership Group, and I began teaching and coaching senior executives. That bled downward into the rest of the organization chain of command. So that's what I do now. I coach and consult leaders in all industries, all size companies. I do, 8-person startups, all the way up to I've been in a couple Fortune 500s for some engagement. So it's really good. And to put a capstone on it, this is what I'm meant to do. I think the previous 24 years in the Marine Corps and the previous 15 years as a business executive has set me up now to what I plan to do for the rest of my life, and it's helped develop leaders. So I have the best job in the world, Richard.
Fantastic. Yeah. And as somebody who's been involved in developing leaders, yeah, it's wonderfully gratifying, to see people evolve. And yeah, I mean, you talk a lot about it in the book. I've made two notes from your intro there. This point about planning, and it comes up in the book, right? You reflect on how effective you were at planning, and I suppose the dearth of planning skills around you that you experienced when you first entered Kforce. And then this second point, rough guidance. So I'll come back to that. I'm sure you've got some good stories of how that manifested. So first of all, planning. So how do they teach you to plan in the Marines? I'm guessing that's where you first get trained in this. That's perhaps different. And that relates to this theme of trust that you could share.
Yeah, I think the best way, I always try and present things so your audience can relate to it. The best way the Marine leaders are trained to plan. I believe if you've ever gone, you've taken commercial airline flights. And if you've ever, while you were boarding, get held up in line, the line is stacked up and people are trying to get their seats. If you peek in the cabin, often you'll see both pilots with a checklist in their lap, and they're checking off items, like, yeah, we've got enough fuel, we've got this, we've got that. I've never seen a checklist, but I know they're doing a checklist. And similarly with doctors, I have a few physician friends, and they say, no, Mike, I'm telling you, we just don't go in and wing it by memory. When I go in and do a hip replacement, we have a pre-op checklist. And then during the surgery, it's split into phases, and we check those items off to make sure that I don't leave some instrument inside that person's body and sew it up in her, And so that's how we're trained to do, is go down a checklist at first, and then as we get more experienced, it becomes intuitive. So teaching it, I teach the checklist, but after doing it now for 40 plus years, a lot of it is really in my leadership DNA right now. But I tell everybody, when in doubt, revert to the checklist. Whenever I make a boo-boo and a mistake and all that, I'm saying, you dolt, you went without the checklist and you forgot steps 3 and 5, or you didn't pay enough attention, or you misaligned the sequence of them. So it's good. It's how I do it.
Right. And is there a particular story from your time in the Marines you can think of where either you missed a checklist item or it worked really to your advantage?
Yes, I like to tell stories to, I like to think I've done well in both of my careers. And so to keep myself honest, I always tell stories where I just completely blew it. So I was in charge one time of a live fire exercise, and it was a very challenging thing to design. And so it was going to be fire and maneuver where you have people firing weapons, but we're running and shooting and jumping over obstacles. It's dangerous. You have to have your act together. Everybody has to know where everybody is. And so I if I say so myself, I had a brilliant plan. It was all there. Everybody showed up. And then my boss came over and said, Mike, I hate to be the one to put a damper on the festivities here. He said, everything looks great, but I don't see the ammunition. And so I've got Marines showing up, we're not started yet, but the trucks are coming, Marines are getting off, like they're going to shoot. And I'm like, maybe not, I forgot to order the ammo. So the reason why is because I forgot to coordinate effectively with the sergeant whose primary job in that exercise was to deliver the ammo. And he had a family issue the week prior. So ordinarily he would have come and saved me, like, sir, would you like to order ammo? He would keep me honest. He wasn't available for that. And so, yes, imagine a doctor showing up in the emergency room with no scalpel and they forgot the anesthesia. It's probably not going to go well, So right. I deviated from the checklist. I failed to supervise. How can you have a live fire exercise? It's like going, and the civilians will understand this. How do you go hunting and all of a sudden find yourself in the woods without your shotgun? It's kind of a requirement, So yeah, I blew that one big time. And I've had similar experiences in the business world where, myself and my team, I've allowed ourselves to get so mesmerized by the high level stuff that you forget to order the coffee, so to speak. Like there was one time we were so focused on acquiring this new technology back then called rack servers. I'm sure you know what we were so enamored of this that we went all the way through the approval process and realized we hadn't really selected a vendor. Like, okay, we've got approval, we've got budget, but we probably should have been talking to various vendors along the way to see which brand we're going to use and what kind of deal we're going to get. And so there's been several of those. And so the way, even with all my experience, the way to avoid that is back off. And I don't care if my experience allows me to go through the checklist fairly quickly, go through the checklist. Make sure you're not forgetting something, because from personal experience, Richard, my own, I'm a pretty savvy guy, experienced, but I still very prone or very capable of forgetting the ammunition, so to speak.
Right. And just as you say that, I'm working in a co-working space today, and I always bring my equipment for the podcast, and I've forgotten my webcam, so I've got a slightly worse quality video, right? It's like right as you're saying this.
That's okay.
Yeah. And so when you came into Kforce and you talk about this, was that the first thing that you noticed in terms of how people were planning differently, as a lack of checklists, or what was it that was different that you observed that was contributing to an inability to plan effectively?
Great question. It took me a while, first of all, to transition to the business world. And, I went in knowing that I really didn't know much at all about business. And I falsely allowed myself to believe that, I am a complete minnow in a world of sharks here, like I don't know. So just sit down, shut up,
So it's
and
the
observe.
ex-US Marine. I mean, that in itself is
Yes,
interesting, right?
yes. I just shut up and listen. And it was during my second meeting, they allowed me in the executive team meetings right away. They're halfway through my executive team meeting. My gut instinct said, okay, Mike, you don't know what they're talking about, but you do know that they're not talking about it well. They're not planning. There's a whole lot of I don't knows being thrown across the conference call and all of that. And by the third week, I knew that I was surrounded by good people, good entrepreneurs, but we had some serious coordination and planning issues. And to the defense of them and the company, when I joined Kforce, Kforce was really at the time, it was a publicly traded company. It had just concluded a year before that maybe a 8-year buying spree of companies. So the Kforce that I joined, Richard, was really a melting pot of, I think, 12 companies. And they acquired them, but they did not integrate them well. So in many cases, we had a dozen compensation plans, widely varying technologies. And your audience will know, I mean, 12 companies rolled into one, but not integrated, a scenario for a nightmare. And so that's what I rolled into. And well, we didn't get that email because we're on this system, or well, you want us to do this by Wednesday, but we don't have access to that system or the process or whatever. And so I like to think that someone like me got to the company with the right skills at the right time, because my lack of business knowledge, in a way, was an asset in some cases at first, because I had no biases. All I know is they told me, Mike, we'd like you to figure this out by the end of the year. How do we migrate everybody to our premier payroll system? And so while I didn't know technically how to do that, my military planning background, the steps to get that done are no different than, Mike, we need you to take your task force and seize that objective no later than 1200 Thursday. Well, okay, 1200 Thursday it is, and then you just start reverse planning. So many of the obvious questions starting from the reverse planning process really are highly adaptable to the business world. And people saw, okay, if this guy throws his slides up, immediately we start filling in the gaps. And sure enough, 45 minutes later, it's a relative term, we've gone from complete chaos and organization to a little bit less. And at least now we know what's expected of us before we meet again tomorrow. So it was
right. But there are a lot of people. So what is it on those slides, right? What specifically were you calling out that
Yep.
allowed you to be effective there?
Always start off with the mission statement, like, okay, the CEO has requested, which basically means he has decreed that we're going to go everybody on the same payroll system by the end of the year. And it's April 13th right now. So the mission is, payroll system, integration end of the year. And then the next slide would be, big issues. And people would start saying, Mike, I'm an IT guy. I don't think that's enough time. Boom, I put time up. So now we have time. The chief financial officer was looking at me with sweat on his brow saying, Mike, I know these things aren't cheap and we've not budgeted for that. So financial, funding, and we would just go down the line. The IT guy would say, it's not only we don't have enough time, Mike, but I can tell you to do this, we don't have certain skill sets in our IT group to accomplish this. An analogy, I used to make them use first aid or medical analogies, the human body, or automobile analogies. He said, Mike, what I'm telling you is we can drive this car. We just cannot build it. We're going to have to bring in some external augmentation to help us unify the databases, and there's got to be training and all of that stuff. I'm like, oh, so that got thrown up there. And then I would take each of those big bullet items and then I'd create a slide for them And we say, okay, let's talk about time now. And of course, the non-techies wanted to say, well, the CEO said by the end of the year, by God, it's going to be by the end of the year. And the IT, the chief executive, CIO would say, well, I hear you, but I can tell you that I would be derelict if I told you I could do that with my present staff and present skills and talent. If you insist on end of the year, I'm not fighting that. What I'm telling you is it connotates a relatively huge augmentation of my staff. And he goes, now, if you tell me that I'm going to get that augmentation, we can do this. Then I can sign up for the end of the year. Unaugmented, I'm telling you right now, I would be lying if I raised my hand and said, oh yeah, we could do that, And so just getting people to honestly like that, Richard, that made the non-techies, the executives in the room sit back and say, okay, what you're saying is if you get beefed up with the right people and the right staff, you have confidence that we can pull this off. And he said, yes, but without it, it would be like, fellas, I remember him, he said, fellas, it'd be like me, the CEO, looking at you saying, you need to triple sales by the end of the year. And you would all look at him and say, okay, I understand an increase in sales, but triple sales with no additional sales force. I mean, that's a mean trick, And so just by providing those high level bullets up there, which are pretty intuitive. And I know your audience is like, well, no kidding, Mike, that's not hard. It's not hard. I found that once you put the bullets up and kind of refereed the conversation, and people realized, and every now and then I would have to go all the way back to the first slide. Remember, folks, this is the mission. This is the mission. Now you're talking about changing our compensation plans, and that's an entirely different discussion.
Right.
Well, if we're going to do that, we got to change content. Nope, hang on. That's a different discussion. And I believe that's from my counterpart, the chief sales officer. And he says, yes, absolutely right. We need to get on the system. Commissions, yes, we do have to take 12 commission plans and codify them into one. But to Mike's point, that's more of a paper exercise than us talking about it. In the meantime, Mike and his folks need to make sure that the system is ready to receive the new compensation plan. That the compensation plan is just a matter of keystrokes and data entry. We need to be the data entry must all go in the Premier Pro system by the end of the year. So I hope this is illustrating, what I was sitting through and all of that. I mean, I like to say that I added value. I didn't add magical value, Richard. It was just that they were great people, mostly from a sales or finance background, and most had no experience in organizing large groups of moving parts and focusing, managing on the end state. So actually, one of the first terms I taught them was mission and end state. What's the desired end state? The end state. The end state is we're all on one payroll program by the end of the year. And it was gratifying because within a few meetings, I would hear someone else say, no, Harry, that's not the end state is we're all getting on that payroll system and all that. So it was, they adopted these terms very, very quickly. And so it was gratifying to see. So I find, Richard, in my business career, I think the business world is very much a meritocracy in most good companies. And when people see something that's working, the vast majority of people are not too proud to say, hey, I love this. I wish we were doing this years ago. We're doing it this way from now on. Right. That's how it worked with me.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm sort of divining from this is there's absolutely something about this, one thing and do it well. Right. And we've, this mission, we're just doing this one thing. Let's focus on this. We had a author of the book Radical Focus on this show who talked exactly about this importance of business. In business, we'll just load on, more and more goals, right, into a particular quarter or time frame. But this idea of just having the one thing, focus on that and get that done. And then the second thing, it sounds like what you're doing is you're bringing all of these voices, out into the open, right, onto the table.
Yes.
Am I right there? Are those
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, as far as bringing all the voices up, I think there were, so think about, you've got executives now I think we had executives on the team from maybe 6 or 7 different legacy companies. And some of those companies used to be business enemies, so to speak. And some of them weren't all that happy about getting acquired by Kforce. So you had a lot of the human element involved. And so I benefited from the fact that I was not from any of the 12 companies, that I was a new guy tasked with helping organization and all of that. So people were not prone to disagree with me just because they came from Chevrolet and I came from Ford, so to speak. I didn't have that baggage with me. But yes, refereeing and conducting professional meetings had so much to do with it. I tell clients, my saying on that is meetings reveal culture. And I tell my executive clients, if you'll let me into your main executive meeting, introduce me. Hey, Mike's here. He's going to work with us. He's going to work, we're going to go through some leadership training. I said, if you'll let me in, I'm going to make a bold statement here, but within 15 minutes, I can find out a great deal about your company's culture. And usually it's, I'm dealing with, type A, high confidence executives like, oh, my 15 minutes. What can you tell? I said, well, let me walk you through this. I said, I'm going to show up 5 minutes early, and I'm going to see 5 minutes early, has the executive assistant set up the projector? Is the technology ready to go? If there's supposed to be, water or refreshments there, is that good to go? Are the lights on? Or is that room ready to receive people? Vice, okay, we're all here at 9, but we've got to test now to make sure that all the technology is good. And we really do have the phone connections to the UK and the Philippines and all of that. And then I sit back and I notice if the meeting is supposed to start at 9, did it in fact start at 9? Or are people straggling in at 9:06? So the 9 a.m. start really was a 9:12 start. And next thing I'm looking for, is there an agenda? And typically there's no agenda. And the next thing I'm looking for is when certain individuals talk, are any of the other people in the meeting ignoring him? Are they on their iPhone? Are they texting? Are they having side conversations? Is one or more of them rolling their eyes? Is there obvious personal animus between some of these folks? And I say, Richard, Joe, Fred, Sally, usually I can see or not see all of those things and more within 15 minutes. And if I see or do not see what I'm looking for, I can pretty much estimate where the culture is going to surface if I dig a little bit deeper. And that usually, gets them nodding their head like, and I hadn't thought about that. And I'm just going to be honest with you, Mike. I am going to let you in the executive meeting next Friday, and I'm going to tell you right up front, it starts at 8, but it probably is not going to start at 8. So please don't judge me too hardly, So, that they have that Marine, stereotype where I expect them to march in at 7:59 and do facing movements and, sing the Marine Corps hymn and all of that. And so it was good. But, that's one of those things while we're on the topic of this, meetings reveal culture. This is one of the things that I tell the client, the leader, look, this is something that is so easy for you to fix that just by saying it and by leading by example, I've seen companies with years of haphazard meetings within 2 or 3 weeks, people are saying, I like this. I like being on time. I like that everybody's engaged. I like that we've got an agenda. I like this. I can prepare for this meeting, and we're having more productive meetings in an hour than our previous 2 or 3 hour meetings, because we were just wandering with no direction, no end state for the meeting and all of that. So I would like to tell you that this is my own unique skills. All of this was borrowed from other sources. And mine at the front was, the military, the Marine Corps. The great companies I've been able to work with all do the similar basics. It's all the similar basics. The metaphor I use is all doctors have different specialties, but they're all dealing with the same human physiology and anatomy. Whether it's a surgeon, an internal medicine guy, a psychologist, the brain is the brain, The spinal cord is the spinal cord. The circulatory system is the same. And they all have that fundamental grounding in basic human anatomy and physiology. And the meetings and the benefit that it can be gained from them all rely on, I mean, I didn't rattle them all off, I don't think, because I don't have the checklist in front of me, but it's on time, fully prepared, engaged, agenda. We don't speak out of turn. We in fact, in my company, we had a rule, a standing rule. There was no cell phones, no laptops allowed on the table. You just didn't even bring it. You just didn't even bring it because there was one exception. If someone's wife was having a baby or their child was sick, they would come in and say, fellas, listen, ladies and gents, I've got my cell phone here. It's on silent, but my child is sick and I'm waiting for a call, or he's actually in the hospital or whatever. And we'd say, yeah, no problem. Well, sure enough, his phone would go off halfway through the meeting. He'd pick the phone up and leave. But we knew that. Or my wife's having a baby and I think she might go into labor, those kind of things. Other than that, everybody know. And that we started as an executive team with that technique, and that became the standing operating procedure for the entire company. And the leverage that it was able to provide, the benefit, fantastic. And I've seen, we had company meetings where we had, maybe a couple thousand people in an auditorium for 2 days. And I can tell you, if you looked out from the rear, there was nobody on phones, nobody.
Wow, that must be people listening to this.
Early on, a couple people made the unfortunate, move of doing that, checking their phone. Salespeople want to see if that client, and I remember distinctly the COO was on stage and he said, "You there, get out. If it's that important, I believe you. Go out, get out and go talk." And naturally he was mortified and he left. And I saw the whole audience kind of sit up, basically wanted to say, "Not me, boss. I see no phone here, But he only did that once and it was appropriate. And he basically was saying, no phones means no phones. We've got people up here that have prepared these briefs for weeks. They're talking to you. These are your colleagues. Listen to them. The very least you're going to give them is the very most of your attention. And so it really was a company culture. And people from other cultures.
Sorry, go on.
People from other companies, we'd have to brief them up front. Like, hey, whatever you do, don't bring a phone to a meeting because you'll get tightened up pretty quickly about that. This is our culture. And typically when other people got here from other companies, Richard, they would say, "Oh, this is so refreshing. It's so refreshing to know that the meeting's really going to start on time and that it's going to be well organized and that everybody's going to get their say. And even more importantly, we're all going to leave that meeting knowing when is the next meeting, what are my deliverables, what's expected of me before the next meeting, and what's my part in the next meeting." And again, it's not Mike Ettore magical stuff here. It's fundamental anatomy and physiology, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. And this challenges with something you say in the book, right? You said leadership over culture, over strategy, over tactics.
Yes.
And many of us have heard of this, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but that was relatively new to me, this idea, and you've expressed it brilliantly in that story you just shared. That is really leadership, right? Is upstream of culture.
Yes.
And if the leaders are setting certain examples, then as you just described, the whole culture of the company follows. We're herd animals in that respect, aren't we? And we're constantly looking for cues from our leaders.
Yes. The saying that you just mentioned, I put out in a single line, and I use the greater symbol, as you've seen. Right. It's leadership is greater than culture. Culture is greater than strategy. Strategy is greater than tactics. And I have never, and I defy anyone to tell me about a problem that exists in the tactics bucket or the strategy bucket or the culture bucket, Richard, that doesn't in some way, shape, or form emanate and originate from the leadership bucket. Like, well, we got a bad strategy. Well, that means you've got bad executives. You've got poor planners. Well, our culture sucks, whatever. I wish that, well, that means your leaders are tolerating sexual harassment or racism or whatever the case may be. So that leadership culture, strategy, tactics, that was the result of me going, I went to a leadership seminar to learn. And one of the exercises was to provide your definition of the importance of leadership in a single sentence. And that's what I came up with. And I dovetail with that. I publish it on LinkedIn, and I put my ugly mug on there, and if it's my quote, and one of them is the quote that Peter Drucker, leadership, it's culture for breakfast, or say the quote again, that you.
So the Drucker quote is culture eats strategy for breakfast, but
yes,
it's like
yes. So
what eats culture for breakfast?
Yes, because I'm trying to remember his quote and mine. So yes, right underneath that. So I put Drucker's quote, and right underneath that, I add my own piece, and leadership is the table the meal is served on. That's my way of reinforcing. Peter Drucker is absolutely right. And I don't know Peter Drucker. I hope I would get along well with him, but I think that if he looked at my addition underneath, leadership is the table that the meal is served on, I think he would say, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So it always comes back to leadership. No matter what we're trying to achieve in any organization, leadership, I think, is, the mortar that holds the bricks of that building together. You could have, as you know, Richard, I use this example. The difference between a building lasting for a couple hundred years and not crumbling is almost never the bricks. It's almost always the mortar. The mortar was inferior, and now water is seeped in, and the mortar starts crumbling, and now you have unstable walls, and you have to demolish that building. If the mortar is good, man, that building will stand for centuries. So leadership, I always ask people to envision the IT department, the marketing department, finance, whatever, human resources. Imagine those as the bricks, and think, I've got really good bricks. And now I say, now liquefy your executive team and pour them in as the mortar between those. And the best mortar, as you know, it needs to be hard and flexible at appropriate times. It's got to withstand cold weather, hot weather, different kinds of elements, pressure. And I find people say, that's a pretty good example, it's not the bricks. It's not your IT department that is failing. It's not the finance. It's not your sales force. I always suspect the mortar initially. Always the mortar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it's a powerful metaphor. And I like the other thing you've talked there is about, sometimes it needs to be hard, sometimes it, it needs to flex. Yeah. And your example of the guy throwing the guy out the auditorium who's on his phone, right? That's where you talk about it, enforcing the value. Sometimes you've got to be hard. So what are some examples of the flip side of that then? When do you have to be, when do you have to be soft? What's the flip of that?
That's a great question. As I matured, Richard, as a young Marine, we were just like, Marines do not cram a 10-second conversation into 10 minutes. So we're very direct, and it's like, okay, Ettore, your squad blew that one. Not a good show. Don't do it again. And of course, that usually won't work well in the business world. And so that's when you have to say, okay, look, things didn't turn out as well as expected. And why do you think that's the case? And I learned that now there were some people, like my boss at Kforce, who I thought would have been a great Marine. He was able to talk to me like that. He was able to say, Mike, not a good thing. I know you didn't plan that. It didn't work out well. What do you think? And I would say, yeah, and we would talk. And I didn't need that 30-second ego massage and soft sell, but I was aware that other people did need that he had to spend 45 minutes making sure that what he was about to say in the politest manner possible was actually taken as non-threatening and non-indictment, because some people cannot take any criticism. So you've got the guy like me that can take blunt criticism, Mike, it sucked, fix it. I can take that. I don't like it, but I can take it. If it's real, it's like I have to own up to it. And then the far end of that spectrum is I can take zero. Even if I know it's right, I don't want to hear anything about me. And most people are kind of in the middle. And the seasoned leader, and I think as you get more mature and maybe blow it a few times by being hard when you should be soft and soft when you should be hard, I think the seasoned leader has a better fingertip touch on when to turn those valves, so to speak. And I want to make sure I clarify something, Richard. When I say hard, I want to make sure, especially coming from my background, it is never associated with raising your voice or intimidating someone or anything like that. And I want to make sure that, if Mike's going to go at somebody hard, no, that means I'm going to talk to somebody professionally and I'm going to use those directness and back to the focus of the mission and the meeting. And the focus of the meeting is the plan did not work well. And, some people try and divert and first of all, let's keep this about the project and let's keep this about you, not about how Harry and marketing let you down. The fact is this project, it's not going well. And while there may be other slices of it that isn't going well, that are not going well, the fact is your slice is definitely not going well. So talk to me. What's going on? What would we do differently? What can I do to help you? Do you have enough resources? Do you have enough cooperation from other people? Do I need to intervene? And usually people will realize, okay, Mike's not here to bash me. I'm not getting fired, but it clearly is not going well. And I think once people realize that and they got used to my style and other people's styles, then they took ownership immediately and they became much more closer to the direct end of the scale than the don't hurt my feelings scale. But I would say to leaders early on, you have to gauge everybody and don't make the mistake of thinking that everybody is able to receive direct, blunt feedback if that's your preferred style. Just because Mike prefers it, actually, just get to it. Let me know. I know it's not going well. Just get to it so I can own up to it and ask you for help. Not everybody comes from the same background, personality-wise, or they've been in companies where if you didn't do good or something was going on, it really was a personal attack. And then of course the boss uttered those nasty words like, hey, this isn't going well. I mean, this could mean your job. I mean, once you say something like that to somebody, you've got the wound, you've given the guy the wound and you can put a Band-Aid on it, but it'll never heal because now he or she is goosey about every single decision. And, I know we're straying a little bit, Richard, but when you have people fearing for their jobs with everything they say or do, that organization will never, ever come close to achieving its maximum potential.
Right.
Never.
I mean, and a lot of the reading I've done around the Toyota culture, which of course is venerated, right, by many people, especially in the tech industry, in terms of how they're so adaptive. That's a core principle of the Toyota production system. What became lean is people have got to feel secure in their jobs first.
Yeah.
Before you can ask them to adapt the ways that they work in order to achieve efficiencies. Of course, they're not going to be effective in doing that if they're fearful of the job. So
interestingly, there's another Toyota, obviously Japanese company. I use another Japanese company as the other side of that coin, Toshiba. Toshiba had a huge accounting scandal a decade or more so ago. And we're talking about a global company that was fudging the books. They were lying. And it resulted in all of the executives and leaders getting fired, business units going away, vanishing, and the company was fined billions with a B, billions of dollars in multiple countries. And so I show a little video when I teach, and then I freeze it right after somebody says in Toshiba, there was a culture in which bad news was prohibited. It's like, so we didn't really meet our sales targets for this quarter. That's not acceptable. So we're gonna fudge them a little bit. And everybody from the sales folks to the auditors and all of that, they all lied for so long that they couldn't sustain the line. It was more like, it was like an Enron situation, you know, they just, so you have, so it was terrible, you know. So the companies that, that have promote a culture of trust and what I call, and what others call, it's not my term, Richard, you know, this, speaking truth to power. Everybody says it. It's easier said than done because truth sometimes stings a little bit. But when the people with the real power, the leaders and the executives, or the people with the informal power, you know, and not everybody's got a title to be an influencer, if they set a culture where they don't really want to hear the truth, that speak the truth quote is just, it's often just painting on a wall. It's nothing, it's meaningless. You know, it's like a restaurant with a really nice sign, but you go inside and the place just is terrible. And I'm not eating any food from here. It's dirty. The food's bad. And, you know, so it's substance over image is what I'm saying.
Yeah. But how do we have that culture emerge? So I'm just thinking in your situation, say, you know, the CIO of Kforce, and you know, you're going to hold people to account. So people know they've got a meeting with Mike. You're going to ask them, you know, what's going on with this project? How do you have them not be tempted to fudge their numbers? Because they know that if they've not hit their numbers, you're going to call them on it. So how do you create that environment where on the one hand, people are held accountable, but they're not fearful and they're not incentivized to lie?
It's a great question. And I'm going to maybe contradict myself. Whenever I took over an organization, even in the Marine Corps, I would talk to people and say, look, we don't know each other, but you all know this. You've all been trained to this. We're going to make mistakes. I'm not perfect. The one thing I will promise to you, though, is I will never willingly breach integrity, ever. And if I did that and got caught, I would expect to be relieved of command, fired, my career is over. On the other hand, I can tolerate mistakes, Marines. What I will never tolerate is an intentional, willful breach of your integrity. If you get caught lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating or covering up someone that does, I will do my very best to remove you from this unit and get you removed from the Marine Corps. So I'm only going to say this one time. You'll never hear me say this again, unless there's some unfortunate situation where someone compromises their integrity. And then what you're going to see from me is exactly what I'm promising you. And I say, remember now, on this one, I have zero defects mentality, and it starts with me. It starts with me. You're going to see me make mistakes. You might even think I'm not a good leader or whatever, but you will never see me lie, cheat, or steal, or otherwise do something dishonest within the system. I won't abuse my power and all of that. That correlates and translates very well to the business world. So I'm working with clients right now where we cover this, that, you know, assuming that you're all ethical and all that, you know, you're the executive team. You have got to agree to this, and you've got to live it. And this is one where you've got to disseminate this throughout the company and say, you know, we're going to make mistakes. We've got ambitious plans and all that. The thing we won't tolerate is breaches of integrity. And I find that most companies really, well, actually, I've never heard an executive look at me and say, oh, Mike, that's crap. We're not doing that. You know, we don't want, you know, we prefer to fudge, you know. But it starts, in fact, I just put a presentation again, as I was saying, Richard, for a client tomorrow. And the key concept I'm introducing them tomorrow is the term tone from the top. When I was working, you know, at Kforce, I was a publicly traded, you know, C-level executive. And so a couple times a year, the audit committee comes in from, you know, the big 5 consulting firm, and they have to interview me. And they say, Mike, what do you think the tone from the top is? You're at the top. And I say, oh, it's simple. The tone from the top is we do not lie, cheat, or steal. We do not fudge sales numbers. We do not falsify reports. We do not do that. And they say, well, okay, sounds good. We hear that from all executives. Do you think that people down on the front lines would be able to repeat that? And I say verbatim, because we repeat it to them often. So there's a few things where in Kforce where we absolutely insisted on rigid terms and definitions. And we called that special trust and confidence. And that is, we were operating off of a special trust and confidence that we're all, even from the CEO down to the mailroom clerk, is they have different, wildly varying roles, but they're all expected at the core to have the same character and integrity. And they said, at one time, the woman said, you know, Mike, you're right. I actually, part of this process is I have to go down the line, so to speak, and talk to lower level people. And she said, you're absolutely right. The 2 or 3 things that your executive team insists on, rigid one-line definitions, your people really do know them. And I said, well, we repeat them during meetings. We have painting on the wall. We have plaques. We not only just say them, we continually reinforce them. And more important, when they see them being violated, action is taken swiftly and in the exact same manner that it was advertised that it would be taken. And people respond well to that. People like, I think, to be held accountable. And they really like to be held accountable when they know everybody is being held accountable equally.
Right. Yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense. And it also chimes with what you were saying about your experience of being trained initially in the Marines, is that there's this very strong focus on these core values. And that was one of your reflections, right? Moving into business world, is that there wasn't this intense focus on values and getting to the core of what we expect of you as a character in this business. And that was a difference.
Yeah, yes. In general, I agree with you. I want to make sure, because I tell this to all the Marines and servicemen from other branches that are about to get out. I said, you know, don't look down your nose at civilians and businessmen. I've met many that are smarter than hell. And I will say this, Richard, to your question, I find that the vast majority of people in business are absolutely ethical. And despite the lack of ethical training, and the vast majority of them are absolutely ethical, honest, do not lie, do not fudge reports, do not do any of that. Sadly, the people that I find that do exhibit this kind of behavior, sadly, often have been taught to do it. So when we at Kforce hired new recruiters, new salespeople from other companies, we were very cognizant that, hey, some of these other companies actually promote some nasty practices, like if you're supposed to make 10, recruiting calls a day and you only made 8, just invent the other 2 just to keep my boss off my back. Just say you made 10 calls. And so we would always talk to them, and they would say, good, thank you. I hear you. And I'm gonna let you know, I've been some places in the past where it was 10 calls, whether you made 10 calls or not. I said, no, we don't do that here. If you didn't make the 10 calls, we want to know why. What happened? Are we giving you enough time? Did you get held up, unduly in traffic or at a client? We want to know why, and so I always tell people, err on the side. You have to lead by example from the top, the tone from the top, but tell people what you expect from them in the way of character, ethics, and integrity. And 99.9% of them will within 10 minutes say, I can do that. Right. It costs nothing, to have that conversation. And most people, I think, are absolutely equipped from childhood. Their parents and their teachers taught them right. They know right from wrong.
Yeah, no, that's very true. But and it has me reflecting on one of my formative experience professionally. Was I joined Arthur Andersen, right? That was then the accounting firm, not long after university. And one of the things you talk about, when you join the Marines, is that they tell you you're elite, right? They build your self-esteem, and that's really important. And that's what they did in Arthur Andersen, right? You're the cream of the cream. We've selected you from the best universities. Yeah. You joined this global firm, and all of that, right? So all of that side of the picture was was drilled into us right from the start. But almost nothing, that certainly that I can recall, about this point about integrity and ethics. And
Yeah.
Is it a great surprise that that was a firm that ended up getting caught in an accounting scandal?
I
And
was,
of course, most people there are highly ethical, but it's still interesting that that isn't drilled into people in the same way
yes,
as the message that you're great was.
that's a great example. That happened when I was new to the business world, Richard. And, I didn't know about Arthur Anderson until I got with Kforce. But, there were Arthur Anderson that just had a famous reputation. Remember the old saying, no one ever got fired for bringing in Arthur Anderson. Like if your company's in trouble, the board of directors will almost always say, well, okay, Mike's doing a smart thing. He's bringing in Arthur Anderson. I like to say that back then, Arthur Anderson was the Marine Corps of the consulting world. I mean, and by the way, the UK has a top-notch, Royal Marines, top-notch. So I'm acknowledging if anybody's listening, the British Royal Marines are cream of the cream, top. But Arthur Anderson, I mean, this was people, to your point. I mean, how many people aspired to get into Arthur Anderson and did not, and you were feeling good because you got in there. And it's amazing. Well, it's not amazing. You're telling me you had no mention of character and integrity. And Arthur Anderson, the mighty giant, literally that branch went out of business because of systemic breaches of integrity and character. And it was, people were here in the United States were beyond disappointed. It was like, Arthur Anderson? I mean, this would be like Catholics finding out that the Pope had done something wrong. I mean, Arthur Anderson was cheating. It was unthinkable. And the company simply, I know they survived, one of them and all of that, and somebody else bought their name, but largely speaking, the company vaporized overnight. As you know, it was a very quick.
I lived through that, right? I mean,
it was a very quick
when it collapsed. Yeah.
Top of the game. I think it was a matter of weeks before it was gone. Gone. So that was a huge thing to me. And one of the, again, things that showed me, Mike, this character and integrity and ethics thing that you've been forged in as a Marine leader is absolutely applicable out here in the business world. And again, in the defense of business people, I find that the overwhelming majority of them are absolutely have great character, ethics, integrity. Where they fall short is having discussions about it.
Yeah.
As having discussions and saying we're all ethical and all of that, but we're a small group, so we're all on the same sheet of music, so to speak. We've got 35 other leaders that aren't in these meetings. Well, if we want them to share our character, ethics, and our standards of this, we need to talk to them about it. We need to talk to them about it so that, we're all on the same page on this, so to speak. That's where people fall short. And that's primarily what I do, is cause the conversations. I tell people when they hire me, as if I'm going to coach the executive team, I said, at the end, I'm not going to give you a refund, but at the end, you'll realize that most of the goodness that's going to come from this is me causing you to have conversations that in hindsight, you'll say, we had all the answers, but until Mike directed us to have the conversation, we just never had the conversation. And we really were aligned, but we never talked about it. So if we weren't aligned on it, how do we expect our subordinate teammates to, our other branches and offices, how do we expect them to be any more aligned than we are? And so that's my real, that's how I can steal business from myself is, the answers are pretty much within people. They just got to decide what's important and get the other executives and top leaders to agree. And then they have to relentlessly hammer it home through their own example and analogies and parables and anecdotes. It has to be lived and breathed throughout the organization. And so we're back to that leadership quadrant of leadership, culture, strategy, tactics. If you want a culture that's ethical and all that, it starts to tone from the top.
Yeah. And how do you get that? It's having the conversations, making space for those conversations, just as you've experienced in the Marines.
Got to have the conversations. That, if you show me I'm being kind of cute here. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist or a human behavior specialist or anything, but my amateur observation is whenever there's problems, whenever there's two or more human beings in the same room, same family, whatever, whenever there's problems, 99% of them arise from a lack of communication. The husband knows, puts it off for 5 years, to a point now where what I call a 5-pound problem is now a 5-ton problem. And your equipment can't handle a 5-ton problem. So that's when I tell people is have the conversations, deal with the sickness before it becomes a disease, because sicknesses are a whole lot easier to take care of than diseases. Some diseases are terminal. And if you let your company go and it's just a terminally ill culture, that's really hard to turn around. Usually you have to carve out huge swaths of people, because I say 99.9%, but if you get that 0.01% in your company, boy, they can poison things. They can give your company gangrene, so to speak. Stepping on that rusty nail can tube the whole body, so to speak. So
yeah. So we're just building up this picture of trust-based leadership. So there's something about accountability. There's something about having these straight conversations. There's something about this relentless focus on having the conversation about character and ethics. What is it? Is there anything else as a component of building the trust-based leadership within organizations?
There's a lot, and off the top of my head, I think it always, the advice I always give leaders is, it's aside from character, integrity, ethics, tone from the top, it all can be contained in a basket that's labeled leadership by example. And a term that the Marines use is, for all of our leaders, from corporals, non-commissioned officers, all the way up through generals, is Marine leaders show Marines what right looks like. And that's what we were tasked with, is show your men what right looks like. You want them to be fit and strong? Show them what right looks like. I'll tell you what, that lieutenant is stronger than hell. He can run like a reindeer. I mean, he's walking the walk and running the run, so to speak. Show them what right looks like in character, integrity, everything. If you do that, chances are it's contagious, and people will follow a leader worth following. It's no different in the business world. Business leaders have to show people what right looks like. And in my book, I thought so highly of the term trust-based leadership, that I trademarked it. I trademarked the term because I use all sorts of analogies and examples and metaphors, and I'm probably going to I should create a graphic of this. If character and ethics and integrity, Richard, is the bedrock of which a company is built on, trust is the next layer that must be present. I tell clients this: if you don't, you can have character, ethics, integrity, but if you don't get this next layer of bedrock, so to speak, trust, if you don't learn to trust yourself, trust your peers and colleagues, and promote a culture of trust throughout the organization in a 360-degree manner, I tell them you need to end this engagement we're through right now, because everything else I tell you in the future is for naught. I can teach you leadership techniques. I can share wisdom. I can do all this with you. But if you're not going to operate from a measure of trust, you will never reach your potential as a leader, and your organization will never, because you'll be up there talking a good game, but at the end of the day, your people don't trust you. You're saying, come to me with problems. It's like, I'm not coming to him with problems. The last person who did that got shot in the face. You kidding me? I'm not doing that. So it's trust-based leadership. So as you know, you got my book there. It's the title of the book. I've referred to it ad nauseum in the book, and it is the charter, so to speak, for everything I do leadership-wise. Trust. Everything's based on trust.
Right. Right. And do you have a story you can share, like either where you didn't trust others or trust yourself, and it caused you a problem, or where you were able to trust and you had a major impact in that way?
Yeah, I've got many. I mean, I maybe I won't say a specific story, but I learned as a young. Remember, I was an enlisted Marine before I was an officer, and the I would say one of the biggest things, Richard, that developed me as a leader. And I was a very young corporal and sergeant. I was very, very young, in charge of people much older than me. Um, my leaders did not care how young I was. They trusted me. They didn't care I was a 19-year-old sergeant, which is kind of scandalous at the time. 19 years old, you know. Um, they did not care about that. They expected me not to be as experienced as the 27-year-old sergeant, but to be absolutely as the character, integrity, motivation, planning, you know, looking out for the troops and all of that. So they trusted me, and I had to earn the trust of some of my Marines who, at the time, I had no combat experience. And some of these guys had been to Vietnam twice. I mean, they were fighting in the jungles of Vietnam when I was in the 7th grade. And so you talk about intimidating, but I went in, I was clearly, you know, they had gotten out of the service and then came back. And so they had lost a lot of rank. They were kind of starting over. So I was their boss. But once I showed them, hey, obviously I don't know what I don't know. And, you know, you've got so much experience. But they saw that I trusted them. And then they realized, you know, he's young, but he's good. He's looking out for us. And then they simply banded around me. And I think in hindsight, they refused to let me fail. They said about their mission was, he's young, but he's our sergeant, and he's not an ass to us. And he actually fixed our pay problems and took care of us, and we're going to take care of him. So that's when they would start taking me aside and say, hey, look, Sergeant, you might want to think about this. I mean, I know you said that, but you might want to think about this. I'm like, yeah, okay, let me think about it. And I'm like, he's absolutely right. I was getting ready to make myself the wrong kind of famous on that one. And they saved me. And so my seniors were amazed. Like, you know, they were just amazed that I could get these wild men to comply. They were amazed. Like, what are you doing? I said, I mean, I'm just treating them well. Like, we've never seen this before. This is a hard bunch. They gave me all the problem children, you know. This is a hard, you know, because these guys got out, stayed in the business, you know, civilian work for like 5 years, then came back in and very quickly realized, man, this isn't the Marine Corps I remembered. I remember like fighting and all, and now it's peacetime and I got to get a haircut and shine my boots. So within 6 months, they already realized I am doing my 3 years and getting out. So they were kind of surly, and they knew just how far to go without getting in trouble. But they were a tough lot. But thank God I inherited them, and thank God they were patient with me. So you can see the trust from above. You know, and the Dale Carnegie anecdote is, you know, give a person a reputation to live up to. My senior Marines, officers, and enlisted, you know, leaders gave Sergeant Ettore a reputation to live up to. Like, we don't care how old you are. You know, you've accepted the promotion. You're a Marine Corps sergeant. Have at it. You know, and they were there to help me, but I just had to have at it. You know, and I had to earn the trust of the Marines underneath me, and I did that by everything we've talked about so far. Leadership by example was easy for me to do. Content, like real substance of knowing how to do things tactically, I was a baby with people that were fighting when I was a child. And so why wouldn't I listen to them? And so they taught me stuff. And I like to say that some of the things they taught me saved the lives of Marines in combat 20 years later. You know, and so they were those lessons. They shared some things with me that I never read in a book. It was their own personal experiences that stuck with me, that a couple of them are in my book. And I'm going to write books on combat leadership someday. And a whole bunch of what they told me, Richard, will be in those books. So yeah, I can't say enough about trust from above, trust from below, and everything else took care of itself.
Right. Right, but that integrity piece comes through again, right? You're not like pretending that you've got more experience than them or you know more than
Right.
them.
Right.
That's in itself, that's an expression of integrity, right? And it also, you
Yes.
talk about that when you got the job at Kforce, right? You'd
Yeah.
invite people into your office, technical people, to teach you technical
Yes.
or give you technical
Yes.
knowledge, but
Yes.
that's about building trust, isn't it? You know, I've got integrity here. I don't understand what
Yes.
you know, but I'm willing to learn from you, right? The
It's a
teacher
yes, it's a
scholar relationship you talk about.
absolutely. It's a great story. So I was with Kforce a few years, and our internal IT department, about 180 people, um, big technology department, because our company was tech intensive with placements and splitting profits and things like that with 1,000 recruiters and account managers. The bottom line is, the senior executives decided that the CIO, a chief information officer in charge of our technology group, had to leave the company. When that happened, he was the second CIO to be terminated in a 2-year period. So out of sheer desperation, they told me this. They were at a meeting like, well, what are we going to do? And someone said, what about Ettore? And everybody was like, what? And then someone said, I mean, he's a good leader. I mean, the technologists haven't worked out for us. And everybody said, well, let's give him a try. And so they came to me and offered it to me. And as soon as they offered it to me, I was like, I'll take it. And the president said, well, geez, Mike, that's kind of confident. You want to think about it? I said, no, I don't want to think about it at all. I said, it's going to work. And he goes, okay, I hope so. Why do you say that? I said, I'm a client. I'm a customer of that department. I suspect they've got good people, and I certainly can't add any technical value, but I think they're very disorganized. They're not planned well. I think there's some personality issues there. So I said, I'll tell you what, Bill, if you and the other executives give me the resources I need and the support I need, this will work out well. And he said, I promise you, you'll get both. And then they introduced me the next day to the group. And when I introduced you to our new CIO, and these people knew me. And they knew this guy doesn't have a technology background. And Richard, you could hear a stone drop in that room. It was like, it was my turn to talk. And I said, listen, I'm as surprised to be here as you are to see me. Obviously, I'm not here to add technical value, but I am a very experienced leader, and I think I can help. But what that means is I really need you to help me, to be honest with me. And so I was telling them, I'm not going to come, I can't tell you what servers to pick or what technology stack I can't tell you that. What I was saying is, but I know we have to do that. And I know that you guys are fighting about that, and you're not, some people are saying, will you pick a stack already so we can buy it, so I can implement it? We're not going to hit our deadlines. And so that's what I caused. But when the boss stood up and said, all right, well, Mike will get with you and have a great day. I mean, everybody filed out of that room as if an execution had been announced, and there was only one elevator going upstairs. And I went out there and I could just hear mumblings, like, well, just. And so then I just proceeded to have meetings. And to my earlier point, I had a great amount of meetings with the entire group, because I didn't even want my message to get diluted from the 5 or 6 VPs that I had reporting me. And they were all good people, not that, but some things my team needed to hear from me, ergo the character and integrity, and a new one for them at the time. Listen, I know your IT folks, and I respect that. I don't know what you don't know, but I want to make sure you understand something right off the bat. We, as a technology group, we do not exist to spend money and do incredibly interesting, challenging IT projects. And don't get me wrong, I want you to do that. We're going to get to do that, but I want to make sure that you understand it right from the start. The only reason why we exist is to technically enable our sales force and support units, That is the only reason why everyone out there staring at me right now exists, to technically enable and make their jobs better so they can make money that pays our salaries. I said, we're not second-class citizens, but sometimes support units lose the picture of where they are in the grand scheme of things. And I found they had no problem with that. When that message got out and their attitudes in some respects changed towards the sales force, that was magic. Now the sales force realized, okay, they're not arguing with me. They are saying, well, what's the end state? Okay, the end state is I spend an hour and a half a day using data, putting data entry of the people I talk to. Isn't there a faster way? And the technologists would say, we got it. We'll be back to you next week with some ideas. And so you had the frontline fighters saying, I need bullets that can penetrate armor. And then you had the support people saying, give us a while to think about this. It wasn't the support people saying, here's new bullets, use them. And the fighters saying, no, these suck. They're not good. Are you kidding me? They don't do well. They get moist and they're having misfires. We're getting killed because our weapons are jamming, you know? So it was a perfect military analogy, but that's the value I added right up front. And I was a publicly traded CIO for 5 of the 15 years I was in the company. And one of the directors that worked for me, great person, absolutely not ready to be the CIO at that point, heavy technical background, worked for me for about 5 years. And 5 years later, he became the CIO. He still reported me, but 5 years later, he became the CIO. And several years later, he left and became the CIO of a $5 billion company. And so what I'm saying is somebody that I inherited that actually was not capable of what I was doing as a non-technical CIO. Several years later, he performed as a CIO at a level I never had. I like to think I could do it, but I didn't do it. I was the CIO of a $1 billion company. He was the CIO of a $5 billion company and is still doing well. Now, I claim to have taught him everything he knows, Richard, but he's not admitting that, you know. And I did send him my book and he said, I hope you don't mind. I turn it upside down so I don't see your face. You know, it's on my desk, but I'm not going to lie to you. That's kind of an unappetizing vision before lunch, you know. So it's a great story. But to those listening out there, I would say leadership, organizational skills, and the ability to synergize and synchronize the unit's efforts toward a desired end state. If you can do that, you're going to do well in the business world.
Right. Fantastic. Well, wonderful stories. It's been a fabulous conversation. I've laughed a lot, which I love. So just before we close out, for people watching, I'll put the book up once more. Trust-Based Leadership, Marine Corps Leadership Concepts for Today's Business Leaders. Mike, thank you so much. I just feel like I've got this distilled wisdom that I am definitely going to take away and chew on, and I've got a lot from. I hope my listeners get the same.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity, Richard. Like I said, earlier when we talked before we were recording, I've got the best job in the world. All I want to do with the rest of my life is help leaders develop. So if I've planted a seed or shared a nugget that helps somebody out there listening, I made my whole day. I love doing this. And again, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.